Okay, so one of the very important concepts for evaluating deductive arguments is the concept of validity. Um, Really, one of the first things you should ask yourself when you look at a deductive argument is this argument valid? Um, as we'll see in the next couple lectures, there are also some other reasons that this concept is useful. It'll allow us to do some things. It'll be a good way to save ourselves some work. So this is going to be very important when looking at deductive arguments. In fact, it's probably the most important thing when thinking about whether a deductive argument is a good one or not. Okay, so validity, at least in the sense that we talk about it in philosophy classes, is, a technical concept, right? Don't get hung up on what validity means in everyday conversation, what you mean when you say valid or not valid. We mean something very specific by validity. To say that an argument is valid means this: it is impossible for the premises of a deductive argument to be true and the conclusion false. Then the argument is valid. If you have a deductive argument and it's absolutely impossible for the premises to be true and the conclusion false, that argument is a valid argument. All right, let me give you guys some examples. Here is a valid deductive argument. All men are mortal. Socrates is a man, so Socrates is mortal, right? Again, the old standby from every logic book, the one that you're reading had. But, look, it's pretty simple. It allows us to see the concept, right? All men are mortal. All human beings are going to die. Socrates is a human being, so Socrates is going to die. If these premises are true, and they in fact are, we cannot even imagine a way that the conclusion could be false. Here is another valid deductive argument. No dogs can read or write. Moxie is a dog, so Moxie cannot read or write. I'm kind of surprised you guys have not at least heard Moxie yet. We're all doing things from home these days. Moxie has been guarding us faithfully from the many packages we get. The UPS man is her sworn enemy. So, a lot of my lectures have had some unplanned guest appearances of Moxie barking and growling. So, a little bit surprised she hasn't done that, kind of relieved also. All right. Important point is, we have our premises. No dogs can read or write. No dogs can do this. Moxie is a dog, so Moxie can't read or write. If these premises are true, and as far as I know they are, I'd be very surprised if there are any dogs who ever can read or write. If these premises are true, then the conclusion has to be true as well. You cannot imagine it being true that no dogs can read or write, Moxie's a dog, and that Moxie can read or write, right? Okay, so those are some valid deductive arguments. Really simple ones, but the whole point is, I want you guys to see what the concept is. Here's an example of an invalid deductive argument. No dogs can read or write. Moxie can't read or write, so Moxie is a dog, right? Why do I say this is invalid, right? Well, remember, the whole idea of validity is the premises can't be true and the conclusion false, right? You can't even imagine a way that the premises could be true and the conclusion false in a valid deductive argument. Well, think about it. Given what these premises say, can you imagine a way that the conclusion could be false? Could it be true that no dogs can read or write, and Moxie can't read or write, and Moxie not be a dog? Well, of course, right? Moxie could be a cat, right? Cats can't read or write either, right? So it could be true no dogs can read or write, and it could be true that Moxie can't read or write, but she might be a cat. So this conclusion that she's a dog might be false, right? She could be a young child. Personally, I think Moxie would be kind of an odd name for a child. One of these days I'm going to have a student who has a child named Moxie and then I'm going to be in trouble, but whatever, right? Could be entirely possible. Moxie is a 2-year-old. They can't read or write either. Well, premises could be true. Conclusion false in that case, right? So if you can imagine a way that the premises are true and the conclusion false, then the argument is not valid, right? And that's a good, we'll talk about some other ways of seeing if an argument's valid in the next lecture, but that's always a good first step. Can you imagine a way the premises are true and the conclusion is false? If you can, then the argument is not valid. So just to end, let's think of, I want to, point out a few important things about validity. One important thing about validity is that it's all or nothing. Remember, I said the way we're going to use validity in this class, it's a very specialized term. At least in that specialized term, it's all or nothing. An argument either is valid or it's not. It's either possible for the premises to be true and the conclusion false, or it's not. So validity is all or nothing. Please, at least for this class, never say, well, this argument is somewhat valid or it's really valid. That just shows that you don't understand the concept of validity, or that you're using the term in a way we're not going to use it in this class. Another thing that's important with validity is it only applies to deductive arguments. Remember, with inductive arguments, no matter how good they are, there's always some chance the conclusion's false. If you want to be technical, if you want to be really fussy, you might say that every inductive argument is invalid. That's technically true. As my wife is fond of saying sarcastically, technically true, the best sense of true, right? Look, technically it's true, but it's really an unfair way to measure inductive arguments. They're not supposed to be valid. Doesn't matter that they're not, right? For deductive arguments, they should be valid. It matters very much whether they are. Inductive, it's just not a good way to measure the argument, right? So validity only applies to deductive arguments. Don't try to use it to evaluate inductive arguments. I won't go into it. You get all kinds of problems. You end up saying all kinds of stupid stuff if you try to use the concept of validity with inductive arguments. Another point is that validity is only about the form of a deductive argument. It says nothing about the content. What I mean by this is validity only tells us that if the premises are true, they would mean that the conclusion is true as well. They tell us if the premises are true, they provide really powerful support for the conclusion. Validity tells us nothing about whether the premises are in fact true. You can have a valid argument, and it might still be a bad argument because it has false premises. Validity says only if the premises are true, the conclusion must be true as well. Validity does not tell us that the premises are in fact true. A valid argument can have false premises. Let me give you guys an example. All dogs are reptiles. Moxie is a dog, so Moxie is a reptile, right? Look, obviously, This is not a good argument. Why? You don't need to take you don't need to take a sort of class in biology to know that dogs aren't reptiles, right? The first premise is false. But if these premises were true, first premise is false, second one's true, well, the argument's not a good one. But if the premises were all true, the conclusion would have to be true as well. It just happens the first premise is not true, right? My version of this used to be all dogs are smart. Moxie is a dog, so Moxie is smart. Moxie is not smart. I love her, but she's not a clever animal. That seemed kind of mean, so we go with this one, right? All right. So just remember this. Validity is about whether the premises, if they are true, would support the conclusion in this way that it can't be false. Validity tells us nothing about whether the premises are true. Think about validity as a first step. Ask yourself, is the argument valid? And if it's not, if it's a deductive argument, you know it's not a good argument. Once you've made that first step, though, then you can start looking at the premises and asking yourself, are these true? Are they at the very least plausible, right? You have to go through both steps to have a good argument, but if you take that first step and it's not valid, well, don't even worry. You know that as it stands, it's not a good argument. So a little bit of jargon. I'm not sure your book uses it in the same way, but a jargon you might see is cogent means the argument is valid plus it has true premises, or at the very least it has plausible premises. I'll talk some more about what I mean by this term plausible. Look, unfortunately, we can't expect a booming voice from the sky to tell us that our premises are necessarily true, and at least in philosophy, we don't have the sort of advantage math does that it's either obviously true or false. Sometimes we just have to go with, well, we think this is true, that's what I'll mean by plausible, and we think other people will also accept it. So cogent arguments mean valid, and it has true premises, or at the very least, they're pretty good premises. They're plausible. They're not controversial. Okay, hopefully that's clear to you guys. Now, one thing I'm going to insist on, and you guys should pay attention to this because it will be on the test and arguments. Remember, validity does not mean in and of itself that an argument is a good one. It's a first step to seeing if it's a good argument. A valid argument might be a bad one because it might have false premises. Valid arguments can have false premises. That will be a question on your test, I guarantee it. I have emphasized it, I have told you it will be on the test, so you have no excuse for getting it wrong at this point.